Hello, YouTubers. Hello, Ukrainians. Hello, all y'all. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And today we're going back to the Ukraine now. And things are getting interesting there again as well. Because now we have the United States government coming out today and announcing their confirmation that Russian tanks, rocket launchers, artillery, and other weapons have been moving into Ukraine. And they're showing up with the separatists. And video evidence has surfaced showing what appears to be Russian tanks and Russian rocket launchers in 3 different cities. And supposedly these have been tracked leaving a Russian deployment depot just on the other side of the border in Russia. And that's a fairly easy task for the U.S. to do. So it's hard not to say that this information is correct. A lot of times I would think that a story like this would be propaganda, and certain elements of it will be. But for the most part, a lot of times when I see some of these stories, if it sounds true, if it makes sense as far as strategy and tactics and previous actions, if it's consistent with previous actions and fits in with a general policy of either side, then I think more likely that it's true. And this is one of those cases. And the U.S., of course, expects Russia to deny it. And thus far, I understand that Russia hasn't even responded. And I think they probably a smart policy because there's not really much that the United States can say. It's implied that these weapons are either captured from Ukrainian army. Well, that's the explanation. They can just say, well, we captured these from the Ukrainian military. And the U.S. has countered by saying that Ukrainian armor units weren't operating in those areas. So, but like I say, I think it makes sense. Ukraine government officials actually suggested that 2 entire columns of armored vehicles across the borders, which are very porous. And one leader of the separatist Donetsk People's Republic told Russian state television that they had the tanks, but it was, quote, improper to ask, unquote, where they had gotten them. And so that makes it pretty clear that representatives of the separatist region have no problem admitting that they do indeed have the tanks, that it's a new development, and that he makes every implication that they came from Russia. So there's another indication that this is a true fact. And another reason why it makes sense is because we know that the Kiev government has really upped the ante as far as their assault on these breakaway eastern regions. We now have accounts of cluster bombs. We've seen massive artillery strikes, including artillery strikes in a lot of civilian areas. And then, of course, the fact that there's been airstrikes. And now we also have accusations and fairly convincing evidence of phosphorus being used. And so it's kind of interesting that we find the U.S. on the side of a government that's using these kind of weapons when we look at the Assad government using certain types of weapons, and I find it a lot more provocative. But I get sidetracked. So anyway, not only the use of all those weapons by the Kiev government gives Russia a lot more legitimacy in providing some weapons to counter this offensive by the Kiev government. Seeing the Russian-speaking citizens of eastern Ukraine, Russia has the desire to protect these people, but they're not going to go as far as to annex the area. They're not going to go so far as to intervene. They're not going to go so far as to openly acknowledge support, at least not at this point. Right now they have so-called volunteers, which is quite understandable that actually a lot of Russians in that area would volunteer to go and fight for these separatists. And then we also have reports of Chechyans, and then of course the local militia made up of the Ukrainian military, the riot police who were disbanded, and other military trained people who share the separatist cause. And one more of the interesting side stories for me is the fact that now it appears the Cossacks are getting involved, and they are bringing numbers from both a Cossack group in Ukraine, of which there are about 30 leaders of Cossacks in Ukraine, and I guess most of them support the separatists. And then we have a Cossack group in Russia that is also going to join up with this group. So the ranks of the separatists are going to swell with Cossacks. So that's always good news. And I guess the Cossacks are also the ones who are in charge of most of the border crossings from Russia into the eastern Ukrainian regions. And like I pointed out, these are very porous, and I could very easily see a lot of heavy equipment being moved in for Moscow to want to even things out a little bit. And I think what this tells us is something that I brought up in a previous video, and that is that it looks like this could go on for a while now that we see separatist military ranks growing, and we find more people, just like all these other conflicts we've seen around the Middle East and Africa. It seems like when there's a fight, there's plenty of people outside the country that are willing to come in and help. And it looks like we're finding an interesting bunch of people going into these eastern regions in Ukraine to defend these separatists. And so it looks like we could be in for the long haul. Certainly we're going to see the body count go up and the violence go up. And at some point, maybe it'll be enough to bring everybody to the inevitable negotiating table. But in the meantime, it looks like this war will escalate, and the odds are evening. Or actually, they're going to be in favor of the East Ukrainian regions, because the Kiev government is having such a difficult time keeping any kind of effective military in the field at all. No wonder they're resorting to such brutal and unsophisticated weaponry to try and crush this rebellion quick. So anyway, there's the latest. As we already suspected, and if it wasn't happening before, we knew it was inevitable. But Russian weaponry does appear to be moving into Ukraine, and this will only complicate matters, at least for the short term and for the long term as well. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too?